My name is Ryan Graves. I'm a former F-18 pilot in the U.S. Navy, and I'm currently the executive director at Americans for Safe Aerospace.
Ryan, what's going on, man? Welcome to the Pilot podcast.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to have you on. A lot of relevant stuff that we'll get into later, especially earlier this year with all the crazy orb sightings and drones and whatever it may be that you can enlighten us on what was going on or any kind of information you have. But first, I really want to focus on you, the aviator, you, the pilot, you, the F-18 pilot, and kind of get a better idea of why you became a pilot in the first place. So was it you being a 3-year-old looking up at the sky saying, I like planes, let me go fly that? Or was there kind of a better, different story to that?
Yeah, I know a lot of guys had their stories when they were younger, but for me, I didn't grow up with really any aviation in my family or too much military service. So it really wasn't even until college after my junior year. I was doing a mechanical engineering and fire protection major, did an internship in Atlanta, and they thudded a book, about 8 inches or so on my desk, and we're like, hey, you might as well start studying. This is going to be most of the rest of your career. And that caused me to really take a reckoning of what I wanted to do and, how I wanted to go through life, and thought, hey, what is something that would be, much more challenging, exciting, and fit who I think I want to be. And the best answer I came up with was, to fly jets, perhaps in the Navy or the Air Force. Changed my major to aerospace engineering, quit the internship, and then dedicated myself to preparing the best application I could to ultimately to the Navy in order to accomplish that.
So what did it look like after that? So after you get this big old book put on, you're like, all right, JK, I don't want to do that anymore. Was it looking at ROTC? Was it looking at how you can become an officer? Kind of what was the next steps that you took to become the pilot?
Yeah. So for me, I wanted to get into fighters of some type. And, at first I was thinking the Air Force would be a good route. They had, a lot of different fighters and bombers, cool aircraft. It's the first thing you think of. And so I started preparing myself by earning my private pilot's license. So after college, I had about a year to get ready and put my application in. I was working in Worcester, Massachusetts, and I would drive about an hour and a half north, do flight training about 3 or 4 times a week with some, crusty 75-year-old CFI. I was half worried that would have a heart attack in the aircraft.
Valid concerns, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. And I got myself to my solo and my private pilot's license. Just prior to that, I actually withheld because I found out that although the Air Force cared about flight time, the Navy didn't necessarily. And in fact, if you went through, you got accepted without your pilot's license, you'd actually get an extra 30 hours or so in a Cessna before you even got into a military aircraft. And so I withheld getting my private pilot's license so I could get that extra 30 hours of free training from the Navy.
Absolutely. Someone else going to pay for it. Sign me up, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, part of my decision too here was I also learned that the Navy, although the Air Force has, many aircraft, the Navy has a higher ratio of fighters to non-fighters. And of course, they get to land on the boat as well. So ultimately, I made the decision to apply to the Navy versus the Air Force. And I went through officer candidate school, which meant, I paid for my own college, did everything on my own, and was able to apply for a slot. And I applied as a pilot and a pilot only. And thankfully, I got accepted on my first pass.
Yeah, which is awesome. Talk about some misconceptions people have, because obviously you said that you had no experience with aviation, you had no family history. A lot of people in that situation, they're kind of like, man, being a pilot just like isn't possible. I got to be a genius. I got to be smart. I got to do all this stuff, which we all know. We know some dumb people that can fly airplanes, right? But I mean, anyone can do this, right? Like anyone can go fly, can go enjoy this career. Did you kind of have any of those misconceptions early on, or were you just like, no, I can fly. If that dude can fly, that girl can fly, I can go do that.
That was my general attitude. I threw myself completely in. There was no real option of failure for me. And I was entirely motivated to succeed and challenge myself, which is why I prepared myself with the most competitive package I could by changing my major and getting flight time. But on the outside, you don't really know what's important, in a career like that. And frankly, it's almost impossible to know because of, the classification of tactics and things of that nature. So you really don't know what you're getting yourself into. And, as I progressed through my career, I started to see the skill sets and the personalities and attitudes that would be successful, not just, a resume with certain skill sets or an engineering background. I flew with fantastic pilots that, were history majors or physicists, and so while, a fancy background can help you, there's a certain personality type and ego and, self-criticism that's required to be successful in that career. It doesn't matter what your resume says.
Yeah, I mean, and you can even take that outside of that career specifically. You can put that in business. You can put that in life. I played football at Ohio State, and the people that made it at Ohio State from high school usually had the right mentality. The people that made it from Ohio State to the NFL, they had that superior mentality where they're able to go past the talent alone. And I feel like that kind of correlates to aviation, correlates to business, correlates to a lot of things in your life.
Absolutely. It correlates to life entirely.
Yeah.
But that would, I would say, was kind of the different mentality. And it's a career where there's different gradations of where you can end up, right? You can end up in a fighter cockpit, you can end up in something else, and whatever you do, I guarantee that you're going to love it. Even if I didn't get fighters, I would at least already convince myself that I was going to be perfectly happy in helicopters and something else. And I've seen it time and time again. It's an incredible career, regardless, what platform you're on.
Yeah. And from the outside looking in, it's kind of like the community you go into, right? Like every different airplane in the military, whether it be the Navy, the Air Force, be a helicopter, be fixed wing, they have their own special community, and the brotherhood or the sisterhood that you go into is what really makes that career.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And when you talk about mentality, did you have that mentality? Was that an issue for you at all? Did you have to kind of learn how to be kind of mentally strong like that? Or was that something that just kind of came natural to you?
I mean, I grew up playing, 4 or 5 sports a year in high school,
Mm-hmm.
basically since I was a kid. So I think in some set, I already had that drive and motivation, and I just didn't know perhaps where to put it, as I was
Mm-hmm.
going through high school and college. I hadn't found that real passion yet. And, I learned what my passion wasn't through the episode I shared with you. But as soon as I saw that kind of future vision for myself flying fighters, I mean, it was like I was already there. I just had to work myself to get there.
Yeah.
I was entirely motivated. There was no opportunity for failure, at least within what I could control, right? But being a pilot, sometimes there's a lot of things you can't control, eyesight or issues, that prevent you from meeting the criteria to get in the cockpit. But in that sense, I was fortunate. Although I did have laser eye surgery in order to correct my vision.
You gotta do what you gotta do, right? Can't
What's
let that
that?
keep.
Yeah,
You gotta do what you gotta do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the training itself? Because you mentioned you had the 33 hours. We can go in a Cessna, but you go from the Cessna to a very high performance airplane very fast. Can you talk about the transition from flying a 172 or a 152 and going into the military trainers?
Yeah, I mean, the mechanics are the same in some sense, right? In a Cessna versus our first trainer in the Navy, which is the T-34. When I went through, it's now the T-6. But regardless, you're looking at about a 600 horsepower prop aircraft, perhaps a little bit more with the T-6. And so while it is a power jump, you're still just moving in a slightly faster Cessna in a lot of different ways. You might have the power to do, a loop or to do some spins and have a little bit of fun, fly some formation, but your speeds are relatively, they're not too much removed from a Cessna, right? Maybe a couple hundred miles an hour, maybe 300, but you don't get that rush. But that's kind of your first basis. So you go into the Cessna, you get the 30 hours. It's like any other civilian training, but getting into a military aircraft, it's not just the system is different, but the standards of operation are much higher, right? In the civilian world, we have emergency procedures. Some of them are perhaps bold-faced, but, no one's sitting there quizzing you in your face on what the exact words are, in the pre-brief necessarily to the degree that we do in the military. And so there's this whole level of expectation and performance and standards, which you need to rise to even as early as your primary training in order to just be minimally competent and ready to go in the aircraft. And, that's a place where a lot of people can weed out because they realize that like the amount of work and the book work and the knowledge that's required doesn't match perhaps the kind of romantic vision of, flying around the clouds without a care in the world.
Right.
Right. So, it kind of butts up against reality in that sense. And it's a good proving ground where people get filtered out who can't do that kind of minimum required knowledge. And you do, like I said, some basic flying formation, instrument flying, things of that nature. But the big jump comes after primary. And after primary, they tell you what your platform is going to be, essentially. So you're either going to tailhook, which is anything that lands on the aircraft carrier, or you're going in a helicopter, or you're going in a big wing, like an E6 aircraft. And so I was selected for tailhook, which meant I had about a 90% chance of getting jets. About 10% of people get sent to the E2 or C2,
Mm-hmm.
the cargo aircraft or the over-the-horizon radar aircraft that land on the carrier. So I was assigned Meridian, Mississippi. That's where we jump into the T-45 Goshawk, a training aircraft. I believe it's about 8 or 16,000 horsepower. But now it's a real jump. Now we're driving a real jet. Things move significantly noticeably faster from the roll down the runway to the time you have to put your gear up to everything just happens in an accelerated frame rate. And that's, almost one of the biggest initial challenges of going into, starting into that fighter pipeline is realizing that things happen a lot faster for you than almost anyone else. And you need to be thinking, several steps ahead of the jet, the aircraft, just to kind of be competent. And we do, then we start ramping up the tactics, some very basics. How do you roll in and drop a bomb? How do you fly tactical formation? How do you fly down low? Landing on an aircraft carrier for the first time. I don't believe they've actually stricken that training since I've been there, but that's, where I went to the aircraft carrier for the first time to land during the day. So it's pretty intensive. This is where you really start getting that technical, challenge of, are you a good enough pilot to be able to accomplish what you're going to need to be able to accomplish professionally, to be safe. And, again, it's a weeding out process. Some people end up are out. Some people transfer to helicopters. You have folks that go to E2, C2 pipeline, and then the rest are assigned to various fighter squadrons on the East and West Coast. Out of there, I finished and was assigned to VFA 106, the F-18 Fleet Replacement Squadron. And now I'm now a winged aviator in the Navy, but still untrained on my fleet platform. And so I now go through another year of training on the F-18 in Virginia Beach. And this is where we're done being taught how to fly, and it's more about learning how to employ the system, the aircraft, as a weapon. I think you solo an F-18 on your second or third flight in it, and you're off to the races. And again, although at the time it felt like we were very much in the weeds, looking back, it was very much a surface level exposure to what we're going to be doing in the fleet. How to operate the radar, how to operate the FLIR, all the different air to surface considerations, all the air to air tactic, but very basic level, just so that you can understand what the basic mechanisms are and how to operate. And again, back to the carrier in the daytime and the nighttime at this point. Once you finish that training, you're off into your fleet squadron, right? And so typically it's timed such that you finish your training and then you have maybe 6 months to 8 months to go through a full workup cycle to work with the squadron and get sent out on a deployment. Certain individuals are selected for what's called priority alpha. If you're, consistently, above average and you nail the boat essentially at the end, you can be immediately forward deployed to an active squadron that's deployed. And that's what I was selected for. I did well at the boat, and about 2 to 3 weeks after I finished the RAG, I was out in the Middle East aboard the USS Enterprise and flew my first combat mission about a week after that.
So things can happen kind of fast once you're done with that training, right? Like 2 weeks in, you're like, all right, let's go to work. Yeah.
And, I get there, I essentially qual in the various weapons that they're using for their loadout, understand how they're operating. I can be effective in that type of, air superiority environment, if you will. But, we went through that. very interesting. We come back, and now we come back, and I start going through what I would consider the real training. This is when we start going through our strike fighter weapons syllabus, training syllabus as like active fighter pilots, strike pilots. And that takes us, all the way through being an effective wingman in a combat environment up to leading a division of aircraft into air-to-air, air-to-surface combat. And that takes you, all the way up basically through your 4 years that you're there.
Yeah.
Most people finish with a section lead or division lead qualification. And these are all like, all right, we're using bleeding edge tactics, against, new threats, X, Y, and Z. It's the full bore, and that's where it gets extremely challenging. That's your PhD level kind of thesis work, if you will, of being able to operate and execute these tactics and, change with the environments in a fluid way, conducting seamless air-to-air and air-to-surface missions, rescue missions, counter, surface-to-air missile missions, electronic warfare missions. We in the Navy are expeditionary. We have to do everything, right? We can't just call in the bombers or call in, fighter-only aircraft. We have to do all those missions. And so we get, constant training on all types of warfare that we could see in an aircraft.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because it's always something that, when everyone looks at a profession, they see where they are now, think about all the hard work and everything that took into it. It's really just you build on each step, like step by step as you go, right? Like they throw stuff at you, you finish it, you go on to the next step, and then eventually you have this whole kind of regimen, a whole kind of training that you did, and now you're able to go lead people, you're able to go do everything that this mission allows you, which I think that the military does such a good job at preparing people for that kind of mission and that kind of flying.
Absolutely. And you don't get that, anywhere else. And you can only do it, with incredibly motivated people that, believe in what they're doing. There's no job like that with a salary large enough to motivate people to take those risks and go out there. It has to be something that you believe in doing.
Yeah, 100%. Did you have any humbling moments in your training at all? Like the way you're looking back on it, the way you're talking on it now, like it's all good stuff. But do you ever have any moments where you're like, man, holy smokes, like this stuff's hard, like I can't do it anymore, or just kind of like a flight where you're just kind of down on yourself?
Yeah. I mean, where do you start?
Yeah.
I mean, that is the nature of being in that cockpit, and operating in high risk environments, right? You can perform your best, but you're never going to be perfect. And, there will be mistakes, and, some of them can be big mistakes, right? From releasing ordnance on the wrong target or performing unsafely behind the boat. The mental errors that lead to character flaws, right? Like not preparing for a mission and things like that. Obviously, those things get weeded out, in the training environment. But when you're active on the boat, I tell people, yes, what's that career like? It's so hard to imagine. I say it's got, the most incredible highs you can imagine as far as what you're able to do and go out there and the responsibilities, but it's got incredible lows as well.
Yeah.
You have a lot of people relying on you. And like I said, nobody's perfect. There's a lot of responsibility and a lot of room for errors. And it's your job to navigate that, not just in life, but perhaps on the same flight. Especially in the Navy where, you have to perhaps go out and support troops, hopefully successfully in combat. And perhaps, you have a good experience, perhaps you have a bad experience, but at the end of the day, you still need to come back and focus all your energy at landing on the boat after a 10-hour flight, at 1 a.m. after you've, had whatever flight you had. And so
Yeah.
you got to be able to walk that line on both sides of it. So, I mean, I could list 100 examples, but, I think
Yeah.
anyone that's in that cockpit has, a long laundry list of, humbling experiences.
Oh yeah, I would hope so, because you learn from those humbling experiences, right? You use those either failures or those mistakes, and then you make better, you do better because you realize that you have to do it for your team, for the country, for the mission, for everyone. Like you said, you're not only supporting the people around you flying, but oftentimes people on the ground too, right? So there's really no room for error.
And there's no room for error, but impossible, perfection is an impossible standard as well in that cockpit. And, I've seen people go through, as a flight instructor, incredibly motivated, capable, intelligent people. I've been, like you said, dreaming about being, perhaps a fighter pilot or pilot, since they were 3 years old. And, sometimes they've gone their whole lives and sometimes without failing, right? But you can't get through aviation, especially naval aviation, without hitting some type of failure point. You absolutely will. And, whether you're right for that job or not is going to be how you respond to those failures.
Yeah, 100% agree. And you want to see how you handle diversity too, right? Like the Navy wants to see how you handle diversity. They don't want your first time handling diversity being in a critical mission, because then you're kind of up in, like, no one knows really what the outcome could be. So if you train it, and if you have the ability to see the failure, understand the failure, and learn from it, then you're just become a better person, a better aviator, just overall better at your job, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
It goes to the old adage that, we don't rise to the difficulty of the occasion. We fall back to the level of our training.
Yeah, 100%. When you look back on landing on a boat, I'm an airline guy, I fly 737. I cannot imagine lining up on a moving target that's going up and down with the waves, that's moving around, especially shooting an IFR approach, someone talking you through. Like, talk me through, one, just the first time you ever land on a boat. Like, what's your mentality like? Are you just like, this is not possible? Or, I mean, talking to you, it sounds like you're like, let's go. Like, I can do this. It's going to be awesome. But just talk about just the initial process of learning how to land on a boat.
Yeah, gosh. So let me start with the process. We do that with a team of experts called landing signal officers, or LSOs. And these are pilots that are within the squadrons in the air wing. And there's both a team in the squadron, and they operate as a kind of distributed group when they're on the aircraft carrier. So before you go to the boat, the LSOs are responsible for qualifying everyone and ensuring they're safe before they go on their deployment. And these are lieutenant ranked, O3 level officers, which is a relatively low officer rank for the amount of responsibility that they have. But there are circumstances where perhaps the skipper of the squadron is unsafe during what we call FCLP warm-up period, the training to go to the boat. It is still that O3's responsibility to clear him for the boat. And there's been instances where, commanding officers or squadrons have been unsafe and not allowed to deploy. The integration with LSOs start in the training command very early on, because it is a big trust issue. And you don't want an 06 barking down at you how to fly your aircraft when you're, essentially scared alone behind the back of the boat on a bad day. You want, your peer out there who can keep you calm and talk you down onto the boat. And that's been part of the philosophy of, how these individuals are selected and, their rank and whatnot. And so this starts at the field, hundreds of passes at the field. There'll be LSOs out there, and we use a ISLID system, a lens with a datum, a horizontal green datum, and a ball that essentially moves up and down, or at least appears to. And that's how you tell where you are on glide slope, where that ball position is. So if it's above that datum, you're high, you might bring some power back to settle the ball down. If you're low, you want to add power to get it above the datums. And if you're right on the datums when you come across the boat, you're going to, snag that 3-wire ideally.
Yeah.
And so the pilots, especially the students, are essentially getting talked down by the LSOs. They're getting graded for their passes all the way from the 180 position to the 90, all the way through. They're essentially getting graded with special attention once they roll out. And that builds that trust. They're able to, there's a whole language that we use to grade them across different parts. So they might be high at the start, high come down in the middle, settle in close, low at the ramp, right? So you delineate, you break the different parts of the pass down, and you can tell the story of how they were flying across the glide slope. And we use that to debrief every single pass and to grade them, right? And so that starts in the training command, and it continues all the way into the fleet, all the way to the boat, all the way to combat deployments. Every landing, there's a group of LSOs out on the platform with a radio, literally talking to the pilot to help them on every pass. If the weather goes bad, visibility is low. On the far end of the spectrum, worst case scenario, they can't see that landing system on the boat. LSOs can't even see the aircraft. And what you'll hear is perhaps one of the worst calls you can hear behind a boat, which is 99 taxi lights on. And what that means is that the LSOs, it's so foggy, it's so hazy that the LSOs are going to visually pick up your landing light, and they're going to verbally land your aircraft for you through your controls by
That's
talking you
crazy.
down onto the back of the boat. And you can imagine the level of trust it takes to do that, right?
Yeah.
And that's why that relationship is started so early. I was an LSO. I was trained as an LSO in my squadron. I was the head landing signal officer for my squadron, and I got to do this across multiple deployments.
Yeah.
And so, specifically, like I said, they get all those landings at the field, but then eventually they go to the boat in the T-45 during the daytime. It's a crazy experience. It's just like this constant adrenaline high, going through it. It doesn't feel real. It's almost like a dream. You're up there, you're flying out into the oceans, everything's blue. And then you just see this very small ship down there, right? And you're flying for him as a student. You're by yourself, right? Your instructor's in the lead aircraft. There's 3 of you on his wing, and he's going to drop you off over the boat, and you're going to break into the pattern by yourself, and you're going to spend the rest of the day in your own jet landing on the aircraft carrier. But when you're descending down to get to that point over the ship, as wingman, you're just staring at the lead. You're not like just staring at the ship and taking it all in. So at first you just see it way in the distance, maybe 20 miles away. It's a small little dot, and you're like, wow, I can't believe I'm going to land on that. Then the next thing you know, you're breaking over the carrier at 600 feet, 800 feet. And you're like, holy smokes, like it's almost hard to put into words. It's just so in your face. It's so large. You can see the activity on it. And it's like, holy shit, this is very real right now.
Yeah, dude.
And then you're stuck in this, this intensely present state of just making sure you do every little thing that you are supposed to do and that we're trained to do, and continue doing that until you essentially touch down on the ship.
First time you touch down, what's going through your mind? You're like, do I do it? Do I do it? Am I here?
No thoughts, because
Yeah.
the moment I touched down, my body and everything else was flung forward, and your arms and legs are basically like this,
Yeah.
because there's so much force and accelerating down. And then, as often happens, it didn't happen to me, but often the first time you land, the tower has to come up and tell you to bring your throttle back, because
Yeah.
you just totally forget you're missing the signal. But you bring your throttle back, and you're still very much in it. You're now taxiing on the busiest, pavement space on the planet for aircraft, and you have as dangerous as a mission as you just had a moment ago, to follow the flight directors, go through your procedures, not run anyone over, not go off the side of the deck. So it doesn't stop. And typically you're taxiing right back to the cat. And now you're shooting off for the first time within a minute to go do it again.
Dang. Just when you're talking about that, seeing like this little tiny boat out in the distance, I'd be like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? It's like, it's game time. Let's go. Let's buckle up. Oh yeah. Man, that's crazy. It's just for someone that's never had that opportunity to do that. Like, I don't even think I can truly understand what the feelings you're going through when you're doing that for the first time.
I don't have the right words for it.
Yeah, you're trusting someone else, right? You got the LSO that's guiding you in, so there's got to be this immense trust. And then, you're off just a little bit. Things can go very badly, very fast in that environment, and especially when you're talking about when they need your taxi light on to even just be able to see you, to guide you in. Whew, man, kudos to you guys. That's amazing. I always love getting the military perspective, just because I've always been civilian on my side. And it's just so cool. It's so cool to hear. And it's just it sounds like such a rewarding and such a great career to go through. And so many people look back on it very fondly.
Yeah, it was an incredible experience. And it's one of those jobs where you can't do it forever.
Yeah.
Right. And so, at least I always tried to appreciate just how, awesome it was what I was getting to do for that small sliver of my life.
Yeah. I think it's a hard thing to do, right? Like, I think that's a learned skill, to be able to appreciate the time of life that you're in, because a lot of times you're never going to be able to experience what you're experiencing either right now or in the military, but that's something that's very hard to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So kudos to you for having that mentality. When you look back on your career, obviously talk about looking back fondly, you enjoyed it, but can you think of just one overall moment that was kind of like, man, this is what it's like being a military pilot?
Yeah, there's, I've had some incredible training flights, right? Because I've got to, I got a lot of specialized training. I got to do forward air controller airborne, which means I got to take command of a battle space and employ other jets, like tools. I got to do combat search and rescue, where I would lead the whole air wing in if anyone was shot down while we were out there, to go rescue them and fight our way in, fight our way out. But all that pales in comparison to just being operational, right? there's all the crazy experiences of landing on the boat and many more we haven't talked about, and the challenges of training. Um, you know, Flying a real operational mission, with ordnance, with people on the ground, with bad guys hurting people, going out there and employing and doing the mission and helping people.
Yeah.
There's nothing like it. And up to that point, I would say, I think perhaps like many people, secretly at least, I was probably a pilot for mostly selfish reasons. It was just a cool thing for me. I enjoyed the buttons. I enjoyed the technology. I enjoyed, the teamsmanship and the challenge of it all. And, what it represented. But flying a combat mission, dropping ordnance, pushing the button, it very quickly comes back to you, how much bigger your mission is than just yourself, why you're doing this. And yeah, that was, it just kind of changes your perspective about, everything we've done is just to support those guys on the ground. And it was, just a not a mind shift, but it was just a refreshing change to say, like, I can be effective. I can help this now. My training was effective. I mean, some people go through their whole, fighter careers without dropping, ordnance,
Yeah.
right? So to actually be able to utilize that training, to help, guys on the ground was incredible.
Do you ever have the opportunity to find out, not necessarily who you help, but, whether it's in a movie, always hear like they're at the bar and they're like, oh, dude, you're the one that flew. Like somehow they put it all together. But was there ever like a moment where you really like you're able to meet up with the people that you helped on the ground or anything?
No,
Yeah.
unfortunately that didn't happen. There's been a few folks that I've met that were operational in similar places, but and recognize our call signs, but don't know if it was them,
Yeah.
us, them individually. Yeah.
Yeah. As you're starting to transition out of the military, was there ever a plan? I mean, a lot of military pilots say they kind of see their career like, all right, I have this skill. I can go fly airplanes. I'm just going to continue this up, go Southwest, go to American, go to Delta. Was there ever that thought that you're going to continue and just fly for a career?
Yeah, absolutely. I finished my career out as an instructor in Meridian, Mississippi, instructing the T-45 Goshawk. And it's kind of like a pipeline, if you will. I mean, you build a bunch of hours there, and then, it's the time of your career where you can get out. And so people make the decision either stay, or get out and, build their hours so they can go into the airlines.
Yeah.
And, it's hard not to want to do that. You hear them talking about the good life and, how much you're making, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
But it was never my passion to fly, big wing aircraft around the country. And for me, I wanted to be more stable and home more. Um, Especially after, being in the Navy for 11 years and travel around, getting out was a point where I could, start having kids and being around more. And I didn't want to be gone a lot in airlines, but I still did pursue it. With all that being said, it just was still too juicy of a carrot. And I did pursue it. I had a job at American Airlines for a short amount of time until I left, and went into the defense industry, where I got a really unique opportunity to work in an advanced research and development center, where we did a lot of work with DARPA, for advanced capabilities for fighter aircraft.
Oh, cool.
Which is right up my alley and, really interesting stuff to me. So I decided to switch into that. And now I'm, working with, folks in the defense industry to bring forward advanced autonomy capabilities for next generation fighters.
Dang. That's quite the job. When you talk about that, like, I mean, airline pilots, they love to tell you how great it is, right? They're like, oh, dude, I made 600 grand. I flew 2 trips, like they're the first ones to tell you how great their life is. And it's one of those things that's hard to not just kind of fall into and just do it. Even if it doesn't work out perfect for your life, like, this is what pilots do. We fly in the military, we go to the airlines, we retire, we go on layovers, and we drink beer. That's pretty much what people think pilots do sometimes, right? But was it hard for you to walk away from that carrot, as you said, that kind of just that easy life, that easy job, was that a hard decision for you to do? Or was it just like, what's truly going to make me happy is working in the defense industry, or being able just to stay at home more with my kids and my family?
Yeah. I think it was a little bit like, the experience I had with that book being plopped on my desk a bit, maybe not quite as sudden, but, working with the reserve guys who are constantly flying, in the airlines, some of those guys were flying during 9/11, right?
Yeah.
And although salaries can be good, there's also a lot of turmoil that can happen and uncertainty and mergers and, there's a lot of rigidity in the corporate structure and the ranking system in the airlines that, you know, made it very clear that there wasn't going to be a lot of flexibility or opportunity to do anything other than that, right? Like I guess I could obviously, I could always expand and do these hobby projects or a podcast or something, but I felt like I was going to be locked into that, right?
Yeah.
In a manner that was going to restrict me in a way that I didn't want. So it was tough. I didn't think I was walking away from aviation per se, just flying in big wing aircraft and a nice check.
Yeah.
I'd love to continue to fly. I don't fly at the moment, but would love to when the time's right, when I'm around an area with something fun to rent, to be able to go out and do some low level and aerobatic flying, which is
Yeah.
stuff I always like to do. But I don't have any regrets
Good.
in making that change. No.
Good, man. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's a kudos to you for realizing that, because sometimes you get stuck in this and you just realize the lot of money at the end of the career, right? You're going to retire with X amount of million in your bank and you're just going to be miserable your whole life, and being able to just to decide like, hey, I want to do something else. Like, I think that's awesome. And you did mention, right? Like, being an airline pilot, you do have the ability to have hobbies like a podcast or be a real estate agent. Like, you do have time off, but it's truly, you're still an airline pilot. Like, that's still your job. You're still searching for trips. You're still making sure you get the paycheck that you want. So I think it's awesome that you're doing that. Are you able to say anything that you're working on with kind of your defense contracts? They're pretty hush hush.
I'll just say, it's no secret that, autonomy and small form factor drones and computing and, machine intelligence, is getting much more advanced. And, there's a lot of problems in the military as far as retention, with, cost benefit of being able to send highly exquisite assets after, say, a $200 drone. We're at a pretty difficult place as kind of a legacy fleet of capabilities, perhaps trying to now operate in a world where there's more autonomy and small form factor threats, whether they be boats or air traffic. How do we integrate, the massive amount of data that these systems bring in from across the carrier strike group into real time, decisions and actions that can be used to send autonomous assets to deal with threats, at a high level without having to have, a bunch of guys behind computer screens trying to process, individual threats, in a large swarm.
Yeah.
And so this level of like autonomy and integration with unmanned assets is going to require a strategic rethinking of how we employ carrier strike groups, how we design them, how we man them, how we operate on them, how we integrate air traffic, how we design our sensors. And, that's the kind of space that I look at to help define what's possible in the future so that we can build those capabilities to enable that distributed, resilient capability through the Navy with manned and unmanned assets.
Yeah. When you hear about this kind of stuff in the news, right, you see Ukraine doing it, you see Russia having the ability to do it. Would you say that us as a country, are we behind in any of these capacities, or are we right where we need to be?
We are definitely behind in our ability to respond to UAVs. Of course, we have some very sophisticated technology when it comes to, drones and swarming, but of a military class, right? Of what's perhaps useful against a nation state. But non-state actors or small state actors or terrorist organizations or companies that want to spy through third parties can utilize small form factor drones to cause, a lot of havoc and uncertainty over military bases. They can shut down runways. Never mind if they're actually armed and want to take out parked aircraft, right? How easy would that be? So, part of the problem is that our defensive structure in the United States, over the continental United States, is designed for a particular type of international missile threat. Retuning, reconfiguring, and redistributing data of small form factor threats at low altitudes is a different type of challenge that I don't think we fully integrated into our defense structure. There are progress being made on, UAV detection kits, if you will, like multimodal ones that can be used to track these, that can be placed at bases. Of course, there's a lot of work going on for doing that for defense, overseas, but to bring that back home on the bases or even deploy it onto civilian land, you start running into a lot of policy and regulatory limitations, which is another way that we're not prepared for this threat. We don't have proper controls and procedures to be able to mitigate the threat. And that's what we saw last year with New Jersey to a certain degree, where no one really seemed to know how to respond to this threat.
Yeah, I mean that I was flying. I was kind of like 6 months into my airline career, and I was just like, "Oh, drones, orbs." And I was flying in LaGuardia, and sure enough, outside your window, I just see this like floating orb or whatever it may be, which we can get into if you know anything. But it was just wild, right? Like it's just like so interesting to think that either we don't know what it is, or the fact that, let's not tell everyone because we don't want to freak everyone out what it actually is. But just the idea that this kind of, like you said, there's no way where we are right now. It's hard to prevent anything like that from happening, right? Like our whole military is designed, like you said, for other ballistic missiles or for other kind of threats, right? This is also new. I mean, look at Russia when Ukraine launched all those drones from the back of a van. It's like no one knew that was even possible until now, right? It's just like we don't know how to respond to that, which is super interesting. But kind of looking back and going back to that time, what all do you know about what was going on then?
Yeah, well, when you say time, you mean around New Jersey, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So yeah, let me preface this a little bit and say, for those not aware, when I was operating Virginia Beach in the F-18, after I came back from that first deployment, we were picking up a number of objects in our working areas. We had just upgraded our radar to a much more advanced APG-79 AESA radar. And that's kind of when this whole conversation started for me. We were detecting numerous objects in our areas that were behaving in ways that we wouldn't expect, either stationary, supersonic, 0.6 to 0.8 Mach, and circular racetrack patterns, rapid accelerations and heading changes. We didn't know what to make of it. We correlated them across all our sensors on our jet, and eventually visually ID'd them after a near miss at the entrance to our working areas. They described it as a dark gray or a black cube inside of a clear sphere. But that kind of is what set me down this road. I mean, our squadron continued to have these interactions while we were there. When we prepared for our second deployment, we went on a workup cycle off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. We had dozens of incidences down there, to the point where the admiral, was sending emails threatening to shut the exercise down if, who was ever controlling these wasn't able to remove them, because we had multiple near misses. And this is a carrier strike group training exercise, prepare for deployment. Like if this exercise gets, canceled, that's going to be a note on the president's desk, because we're not going to be able to deploy properly in 2 months. Jeez. So, it's a pretty big deal. And so, they were there. We had those instances. We left for deployment. I have a few reports from guys seeing them, over there as well. And then I eventually left the squadron to go be that flight instructor in Meridian, Mississippi, and kind of forgot about it until 2017, when a New York Times article came out that had footage from our Jacksonville cruise workup exercise with some of the videos that guys in my squadron captured. And that's when I decided to try to speak out about this, because, as a pilot, to have unknowns in your operating area, I think, listening to this conversation, you can see why that's so critical. But I mean, so many of our systems are designed to tell who's who out there. Are we shooting a commercial airliner, or the MiG that's flying next to it, or our own Blue Air guy that's approaching them? We have to know that. It's critical to everything we do. And so to have this one class of object on our radar that we just kind of ignored was a huge red flag for me. Never mind the safety issues coming with, multiple near misses within 500 feet of these objects. That's when I decided to speak out. I was like, I'm in a training squadron. I'm not deployable. I have more time. Maybe I can, provide some information to help resolve this, because no one seemed to be helping. In fact, the only thing that had been done after almost 2 years of this continuous issue was to post a NOTAM to say, hey, be careful, unknown objects operating in the working area, use caution.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And so I reached out. I ended up speaking to the Senate Armed Service Committee, Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, and then ultimately testifying before Congress in July of 2023 on this issue. And not just the issues that we had, but I started receiving hundreds of reports from other pilots and veterans and regular people who were, sometimes seeing similar things, sometimes seeing different things, but ultimately all felt that this was something, like, agreed that this was a national security issue and that we needed to pay attention to it. And to get back to your question, we received a lot of reports around the time frame when everything was happening around New Jersey. But not everyone is aware that didn't start last year in New Jersey. It's been going on in that area for since about 2022 at Langley Air Force Base, with some earlier reports in 2021. 2023, we saw increased activity, and 2024, we saw it spread, significantly more, as well as the reports around the country at different military bases from Ohio and Washington State. I mean, even there were sightings 15 minutes from my house in New Hampshire, all the way up the coast, and down to Florida. And so, what was it, right? One, there was a ton of noise, right? So I think the reason there were so many sightings during that period is that it started getting, national attention. More people were looking up. People were launching their own drones to see what they could see. The military or, police are doing their thing. And so there was a lot of noise that was injected into it once it kind of spread. But at the core, I'm confident that there, and we've seen this in our reports, that there are some anomalous behaviors at the core of this that kind of kicked this off. And so, what does that look like? We have about 149 reports from that period, that time period, in that location. And, consistent reports of, spherical objects that are being seen with the eye as well as with camera that, have multiple colors in them that are spherical, either self-illuminated or not. A number of these objects seem to be exhibiting signal management capabilities, right? Between law enforcement and civilians, people haven't been able to track them with RF. Radar has been failing. Electro-optical has a hard time tracking some of these objects, especially the ones around the Langley Air Force Base. I've spoken to the pilots that have responded to some of those incidences. Government pilots, using modern sensors, and were unable to acquire locks. None of this is necessarily magic, right? You could imagine an autonomous system that is using passive sensor systems to either navigate or to conduct its mission. You could imagine, some pretty sophisticated radar shielding perhaps around the propellers, right? But still, that's going to be a problem. But IR too is a bit tricky. It's pretty hard to shield IR energy, especially considering these objects seem to be coming from over the ocean, flying inland, over boats for hundreds of yards, operating for an hour, hour and a half, and then flying back out. You would expect some pretty heavy heat generation as part of that process, but they don't seem to have significant IR expenditure. So these are some of the signal management, problems. Then you got just the pure numbers and the low altitudes and the, in some case, swarming behaviors that folks are seeing, with sudden turns. So I don't have an answer to what they are, but many of what's been reported in news or just generally shared, often seem to be misidentifications, but there certainly is this, weird core to it that is also repeatable over the past few years. And so I think looking to this year, I think it's interesting to see what's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Is the trend going to continue or what?
Just kind of your your expertise in this. Would you think they're man-made, or do you think that there's a possibility that it could be something else?
So, my organization, Americans for Safe Aerospace, approaches this from the angle that we don't have enough information to make an assessment of what they are or where they're from. What we do assume based off of the reports that we've seen is that, very reliable witnesses are being truthful when they observe and report to us that they are observing objects that are exceeding capabilities of the known state of the art. And that is in various ways, from kinematics to signal management and other things. Point of origin, right? I mean, how many objects do we have in our inventory that can hover in space, not orbit, but hover in space at a fixed location and then drop down, next to an aircraft, right? I'm not aware of any, right? So, there's patterns and behaviors that are, inconsistent with the known state of the art outside of just how fast it goes or things of that nature. Um, so, we're very confident that, what is being witnessed does represent capability beyond state of the art, not just tricks of the eyes or illusions based off of the, large number of consistent reports from across, sensors and individuals and everything else. Now, what that means, we don't know. And I have some reasons why I don't think that is China or foreign military in entirety. I do certainly think they take advantage of these opportunities, these confused states, in order to launch assets to take advantage of the situation. But I don't think they're the primary instigator here.
What would be what would be better? Would it be better if it was another country like we found out, or would it be better if it was some extraterrestrial thing? Like one way you look at it, it's like, all right, well, now we know for sure that we are so far behind on certain technologies, but the other one's like it's otherworldly, right? You don't know how to react to anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, neither are very good.
Yeah,
right?
no, not at all.
And ultimately, it really doesn't matter because we have to respond the same way, right? We can't make an assumption if we don't have enough information that, it's extraterrestrial when the threat vector is just as, relevant and timely if it is China doing it, right? What's important is we have answers and that we're not just dismissing this information, these reports, because, we all grew up in a culture where, this topic was considered fantasy or that we've always had the technological lead. So how dare another nation potentially, be able to do something we're not aware of?
Yeah.
Either one's a threat and that we need to pay attention to instead of letting our preconceived notions dictate our response.
Yeah, absolutely. Which, like you said, none of them are great options, and neither one of them are good. When you look back, I'm just going to say UFOs, just because that's kind of like what I was always told to think of what a lot of unidentified flying objects are, right? And I think they're extraterrestrial. Or when I think of UFOs, that's what I think. I think of the UFOs from Aliens and Independence Day, and so be it. But when they come back, and I don't remember the exact kind of story that I read, but it was majority of the UFO sightings back in the day were kind of not super intelligent, were highly classified Air Force or U.S. military kind of ships that were flying out there. Is there the chance that this is something that's just like super high up in the military and that we're just kind of doing some testing and it's just part of the program testing that they're doing?
I absolutely think that it does account for some portion of what's reported. No doubt about it. But some of the other descriptions of reports that, again, are consistent across not only multiple people, but often multiple decades, makes it a little hard to imagine that we've kept a singular technology since the 40s or 50s or 60s that hasn't evolved physically in any manner. Right. So, for example, the Tic Tac, right, that David Fravor saw, there's Tic Tac reports going back to the 60s and 70s. Okay. So is that our own technology that's been an exact same form factor for, 70 years or so? Or is there something else? Right. So, and I don't know, I'm not suggesting one or the other, but, as I understand the rapid development of advanced military technology, we don't have many designs that have remained exactly the same for 60, 70 years, outward appearances. And another thing is that, it's a pretty big deal to like accidentally show someone a SAP program or classified technology. It's not just like, oops, well, we launched it at the wrong time. I guess we'll have to correct that. Like you're breaking the law, right? Like if you took these technologies, as some people have supposed, and tested them against us in the, off the coast of Virginia, they're like, oh, it was just a test. Like it's just as illegal for them to do that and expose me to that technology as if it would be if they handed me a classified binder with the details of the program, right? Okay. It's going to require NDAs and debriefs and all this read-ins and all this stuff. There are processes for it. So to think they're just kind of willy-nilly testing stuff like super secret stuff to see how it react is blatantly illegal and, illogical thinking. And there are specific locations where we have to be able to test, these types of capabilities, and that's what we use them for. So yes, certainly part of the smaller picture, but if you look at the scope of the problem in entirety, it just doesn't make sense, especially, and we haven't even talked about, the international nature of some of these sightings.
Yeah, that's one of my next questions going to be, is this something that is just specific to the United States, or has this been kind of all over?
Yeah, all over. You've heard my description of the cube off the coast of Virginia Beach. I have very similar descriptions in the South China Sea of very similar objects. And elsewhere in the world. So this very much does seem to be a global issue. And, it wasn't just New Jersey that saw an uptick in sightings. It wasn't just the United States during that period, but there were reports globally increasing during that time period as well. What that means, I don't know, but we're a bit myopic in thinking that this is only happening here at certain times because we don't always have access to that broader, news ecosystem because we're just not looking there. But
Yeah, no, I mean, as Americans, right, we seem to just focus on what's happening to us and what's happening in our airspace or technically the city you live in, whether it be small or big. But is there any kind of like what they're flying over? Is anything that's consistent or is it just all over the place? Like, is it specifically military bases that they're going over, or is there anything kind of that can bring kind of a conclusion of what they're looking for, of what the reason is that they're in the air?
the data set that we have, I would say that's relatively inconclusive because of the relatively small amount of reports over what could potentially be, and the type of people that we speak to, right? So we do speak to some veterans who are in unique areas that indicate that these are likely attracted to UAP, but we only have a few of those within our database. We have a lot of pilot reports. So, for some reason, these seem to, operate around certain aircraft, but it's hard to say whether that's a trend or whether that's just, the result of our small data set and who we're talking to. If I expand outside the data set that we have and look historically across other data sets, then it's very clear that these things do have an attraction to what we consider just high technology. Okay. So whether that's nuclear weapons, nuclear propulsion, new capabilities being launched by military, that always seems to bring forward additional attention. Even transportation of nuclear waste, building of new facilities, all seem to garner attention.
Is there like a time like we don't hear about it? I mean, we say we. I personally have not heard about it recently. Is there just like a time frame where is it sporadic? Is it random? Or have you been able to come up with some kind of like consistent time that the sightings are happening?
I've told you about the trend that's recently occurred over the past few years in the Langley, New Jersey area. Mm-hmm. Historically, there's been some studies done that kind of show a bit of a cycle, up and down cycle of number of reports. There's also increased reports around the period of time of the construction of various nuclear facilities in the United States. I think back in the 40s and 50s or so. But it does seem to be a bit cyclic. I guess that's as far as I can say at the moment. But yeah. Honestly, the problem is that you don't have consistent data, right? It's always kind of been suppressed. So you have to make, some statements about what but, if we can bring in and expand more reports, that's where we're going to be able to be incredibly effective. And, my organization, American Safe Aerospace, we've received over 850 reports, many from pilots and veterans. And we've been taking those reports to organizations such as Senate Armed Services Committee, Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, various members in the House and the Senate. We have a working relationship with the FBI, who's built a working group to investigate this issue. And with our witnesses' permission, we've brought them in and they've shared their experiences with these individuals. And it's caused a great deal of momentum and effort, within these organizations in order to better uncover what's happening. And if I may, I would encourage your listeners to go to safeaerospace.org. And you can report yourself. We screen every report. We have both a former witness and Army intelligence officer, Kaysen, who helps screen those with me, and we reach out to individuals to help investigate and process their case. And we have a number of opportunities where, you can be very impactful with what you're sharing, from DC to law enforcement and the scientific community. So I would make that shout out there for folks to join us there. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the last questions I have kind of on this, because I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but when you present this information to the people that need to hear this, what is the response? Is the response just kind of like, oh, yeah, like they kind of like just passing it off like, oh, it's nothing? Or are they like truly concerned about what's going on?
I'd say about half of the people, representatives and whatnot, are visibly relieved that they have a reasonable way of engaging this topic. Mm-hmm. Through a national security and aviation lens and helping pilots lens. Because, I think the average person is probably much more interested in this topic than people believe. There has been this big taboo and stigma around it. But when I engage with people and I'm just upfront and talk about it and bring it up, especially with pilots, it's incredible how many people have had their own anomalous experience, whether in
Yeah.
the cockpit or elsewhere. I mean, for me, it's almost half the people I talk to are willing to be like, well, yeah, actually, X, Y, or Z happened. Um, and so, when I engage members, they're just like everyone else. And some of them have been waiting for an excuse to talk about this. Others are maybe dismissive, but they can't ignore, dozens of incidents from, some of their best trained pilots. They're saying, hey, you put me in this position to use these tools and this training, and now I'm reporting what I found. Don't ignore me.
Are you able to talk about any of the reports that you have that are maybe different or kind of stick out? Just not either worrisome or just like impressive data that you've gotten from any witness reports?
Oh gosh. Oh, I mean, there's so many, but aviation specific, one that always kind of chills my bones is a 737, I believe it was. Two air crew taking off out of airport, climbing about 10 to 12,000 feet, um, um, about 30 miles north of the airfield or so northeast. See a small object on the horizon, essentially right off their nose. Kind of turns back, looks up, object's closer, turns back again. Then next thing you know, they're both watching this black triangle about 200 yards on a side fly directly over the aircraft within 500 feet. Purple lights at the apexes of the triangle, or excuse me, red lights, I believe they were, with like a purple one in the middle. Just absolutely massive, within 500 feet of fully loaded, commercial 737 carrying passengers. Pilots talked to ATC, nothing. There was no turbulence from the near miss. There was no indications on any of their proximity warnings. So yes, these two pilots, they have this, within 500-foot pass with this very large triangle, 200 feet to a side. And as they're, trying to make sense of this in the cockpit through the rest of their flight, kind of going down the decision tree of what logically this could be. At the end, the pilots end up self-administering a drug test to themselves when they got out, just thinking like, how else could we be possibly seeing what we just saw? Of course, the test was negative, but that's a situation that some pilots are finding themselves where, drug testing themselves is the best potential solution to explain, what they're seeing in the sky. So obviously not a sustainable position. And, our goal, American Safe Aerospace, is essentially just to educate enough so that people understand that if they do see something like this, it's not the first time they've ever tried to fit this into their worldview. And they realize that they're not the only people that have had these types of experiences. And we're looking to share our reports and our experiences that our witnesses have provided us on our website and to our community here in the near future, so that as we've learned that this isn't a rare experience necessarily, and there's a lot of commonalities between what people have seen.
If someone needs to report anything, where would they go? What's a website to do, and kind of what's the process?
Yeah, so right now there's really no formal guidance within the aviation world. The federal aviation regulations essentially recommend that you contact local law enforcement, whatever that means. There are organizations such as safeaerospace.org where we collect reports and then we make them actionable so that we can actually provide protections to pilots and provide formal reporting systems for this. In the meantime, we collect the reports to ensure that they get to decision makers so that they can formally petition for those changes. We also have legislation that we've introduced last year and are still working to have passed, called the Safe Aerospace for Americans Act. And this legislation would require the FAA and NASA to modify the aviation safety reporting system to be able to accept these types of reports as part of that ecosystem, as well as protect pilots who do report it, who feel they may have, ramifications from their employer for doing so, which a high number of pilots do report to us as well.
Yeah. What's the website?
Safeaerospace.org.
Perfect. So if you see anything weird, you know where to go and you can report it. And you might get a phone call from Ryan himself. You're like, yo, dude, what happened?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've seen two like weird things. One was the orb I was telling you about when we were coming into LaGuardia earlier this year, and then one was another. I was flying in PC-12, 2 o'clock in the morning, deep in Arizona, kind of close to like the White Sands area. So I just assumed it was something like that, but something I've never seen fly so fast, a couple thousand feet above me, at like 30,000 feet, which is wild. And then one time over the Northeast, there was a controller like, "Hey, can you guys see any of these lights like up at 80,000 feet or like 60,000 feet?" It's like, I have a signature on radar. It's up high, and everyone's like, "Yeah, we see something." And they're like, "Oh, okay, don't know what to do now," but we see it. So yeah, that was all interesting too. So yeah, you see where to go. You know where to go now to report anything if you see it's weird. But Ryan, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. I do have one quick question that's away from kind of what this is, but it has to do with autonomy. What do you think? And you can answer it very briefly. We don't have to get into a discussion about it, but a lot of pilots are worried about AI coming into aviation, coming into 121 world. As someone that works with autonomy, that sees kind of the potential for autonomy, what do you think the risk is for pilots and with AI and with autonomous aircraft?
Yeah, that's a great question. And something I've thought a lot about. I'd say the short answer is, I'd be more worried for the cargo guys than the passenger guys.
Yeah, it's good to know. I would agree. Well, I fly 120. I fly for the passenger, so I hope that. But Ryan, I appreciate it, man. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It's been a lot of fun.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.